Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolutely most explosive student movements of the 21st century. We're talking about the unibrennt, which translates to University Burns, protests of 2009. And to do it, we're leaning on a fascinating framework by researcher Martin Hazelwanter. He actually uses this metaphor of a fire to explain exactly how massive social movements ignite, how they burn, and ultimately, how they extinguish.
300,000. Just think about that number for a second. On November 17, 2009, an estimated 300,000 people took to the streets all across Europe, and really, the globe. What started as this highly localized dispute at an Austrian university somehow morphed into a massive worldwide mobilization. But here's the core mystery we're going to unravel today. How does a movement this massive, with literally that much momentum and raw energy, just fade away a few months later?
Okay, let's dive into this. To figure out how this happened, we're looking at a deeply structured academic analysis from the Forschungsjournal Soziale Bewegungen. Now, we're deliberately stepping back from the political noise here to look purely at the mechanics of it all. We're not here to take sides between the students or the government. We just want to understand the true anatomy of a modern protest.
Part 1, the dry tinder. Now, to understand any fire, you first have to look at the fuel. And it turns out the historical groundwork for all this massive unrest was laid years earlier by two huge, sweeping policy shifts. First up, we have the Bologna Process in 1999. This was a broad agreement meant to standardize European education into a competitive bachelor and master system, basically to boost economic competitiveness and student mobility. Second, you have Austria's University Act of 2002, commonly known as UG 2002. This act essentially replaced older, more democratic university decision-making processes with these hierarchical, top-down management structures. The overarching goal for both was streamlining universities to fit a much more competitive, market-driven economy. So you can kind of see the tension building right away, because on paper, you had these incredibly lofty political ideals, right? A dynamic, knowledge-based economy filled with highly mobile students. But on the ground, well, the reality for students was completely different. They were dealing with strategic underfunding. I mean, imagine trying to actually get a solid education while crammed into overflowing lecture halls, paying these newly introduced tuition fees, and trying to navigate a highly rigid curriculum that left almost zero time for actual, in-depth academic exploration.
Hazelwanter points out 6 distinct factors that were really drying out this tinder. It wasn't just the administrative nightmare of these rigid new systems. It was a really deep economic anxiety. You see, students were terrified of facing a precarious job market the second they graduated. Plus, they deeply resented seeing their education treated like a profit center. You add in the stark contrast between their rushed, overloaded schedules and the older, much freer diploma studies. Then factor in previous activist spaces that were already starting to push back, along with international protests showing them exactly how to mobilize. Well, the tinder was bone dry. All it needed was a single spark.
Part 2, the spark and blaze. What is absolutely staggering here is the sheer velocity of it all. On October 20th, students and teachers at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna held a press conference. They were protesting being forced into that new bachelor/master system, and this quickly led to a partial occupation. Just 2 days later, a demonstration marched straight to the University of Vienna and took over the Audimax, which is the largest lecture hall in the entire country. By late October, occupations had spread like wildfire across Austria. And by mid-November, the fire had literally jumped borders, leading to that massive global day of action, with 300,000 people protesting in Germany, Italy, the US, and well beyond. Inside that Audimax takeover, things were truly fascinating. Students literally moved their whole lives into these massive lecture halls. This wasn't just your standard sit-in. We're talking about a highly organized 61-day mini-society. Decisions weren't being made by traditional student reps anymore, but through basis democratic plenums, where every single person had a vote. They set up specific working groups, organized extensive cultural programs, cooked meals for each other, and completely pioneered the use of new digital media to broadcast their message across the globe. Part 3, running out of oxygen. Now, what's really interesting here is that a fire absolutely needs oxygen to keep burning. By late 2009, the occupying students formally invited the science minister, the chancellor, and various university rectors to an open dialogue. But they hit an absolute brick wall. Science Minister Johannes Hahn categorically refused to attend, stating, "I will not legitimize any legal occupation." This complete, outright refusal to engage on the students' terms totally stalled the movement's momentum at the highest political level. And without that high-level political engagement, the movement basically starved. And here's the really harsh, relatable truth of it all. Students live in a society where they still had to pay rent.
activism doesn't pay the bills, right? So eventually, sheer exhaustion set in. They literally had to return to their part-time wage labor jobs and regular classes just to survive the semester. When you combine this harsh economic reality with the government rolling out what critics called an alibi dialogue, essentially a stalling tactic, plus internal fragmentation among these totally exhausted activists and the eventual police evictions right around New Year's Eve, well, the remaining occupations were just quietly snuffed out.
Part 4. The Embers of Protest. So by early 2010, the literal and metaphorical evictions were complete. And objectively speaking, we really do have to state the stark reality here. This massive global movement failed to achieve its primary structural demands. There was absolutely no return to completely free university access. The bachelor-master system was not fundamentally overhauled, and the systemic underfunding of the universities simply continued, right alongside an increasing reliance on private and third-party funds. So for a lot of the activists on the ground, the core mission was unfortunately a failure.
But wait, Hazelwater argues we shouldn't just look at the ashes. We really have to look at the embers left behind. He frames this as a productive failure because the movement spawned some absolutely incredible side effects. For example, during the Audimax occupation, homeless individuals were actually invited in out of the cold to share the space. And this eventually evolved into Vinzi-Rast Mittendrin, which is this beautiful permanent housing project where homeless people and students still live together to this very day. On a local level, they successfully blocked the bachelor system rollout at the Fine Arts Academy. They triggered this massive society-wide media debate on the true value of education, and they completely energized student media and carved out new autonomous zones. The fire itself may have died, but it left the ground permanently altered.
Part 5. Will it burn again?
So what is the actual long-term legacy of these protests? Well, this builds to a profound, almost devastating paradox. The very system the students were protesting against, this highly compressed, efficiency-driven Bologna system, has now been fully implemented. Students today are so incredibly busy optimizing their time just to survive these rigid module schedules and their part-time jobs that they literally have no time left to organize against it. The educational system itself acts as a massive structural barrier to any future mass political engagement. Which leaves us with this incredibly powerful lingering thought. If the current educational and economic system leaves individuals with absolutely no time or energy to organize and protest, how can that system ever be fundamentally challenged or changed? It's a really tough question, and it goes far beyond just the universities of Austria, touching on the entire future of civic resistance in our hyper-fast modern world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. I really hope this deep dive sparked your curiosity. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next one.